This episode is brought to you by Wintrust. What does relationship-centric banking mean to you? At Wintrust, it means financial care when it matters most. You deserve clarity and assurance from your banking partner 24/7, 365. No exceptions. At Wintrust, we are as invested in your financial health and well-being as you are. No matter where you are in your journey to financial independence, we have the tools and experience to meet you where you are, support you, and evolve with you as your journey continues. Be in business with a bank that treats you like a priority. Visit wintrust.com/together to learn more. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender. Hello and welcome to Resistance, Resilience, and Hope, Holocaust Survivor Stories, a podcast co-production of Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center and Chicago's Studio C. The mission of Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center is expressed in its founding principle: remember the past, transform the future. The museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Holocaust by honoring the memories of those who were lost and by teaching universal lessons that combat hatred, prejudice, and indifference. The museum fulfills its mission through the exhibition, preservation, and interpretation of its collections, and through education programs and initiatives like this podcast that foster the promotion of human rights and the elimination of genocide. On this episode, we hear the story of Ida Paluch Kersz. Ida was born in Poland in May 1939, just months before Germany invaded Poland and the Second World War began. The Nazis immediately occupied the city she lived in, creating a ghetto that ultimately saw the deportation of 35,000 Jews to Auschwitz concentration camp. In the summer of 1942, with deportation imminent, her family tragically came apart, but Ida was given a new life, her Jewish identity known only to her new parents, a young Polish Christian couple anxious to start a family. Ida's twin brother was also saved, but the two would not see each other or know the other's fate for 50 years.
I got this Chicago Tribune. There was this picture of this young man, and I also have a picture of my grandparents. And when I look at him and I look at my grandfather, I saw him in his face. And I said, I have to find out more about him. And the lady who interviewed him in Warsaw, I found her and I talked to her. And she said, Ida, he does not have any memory. I said, give me his phone number. And I called Poland, and one of his sons answered. And I told him, I want to speak to your father. He said, he's not here. I said, well, when your father comes, tell him to call me because I think he may be my twin brother.
Ida Paluch Kersz arrived in Chicago in 1963, having spent the previous 6 years in Israel, where she had married and gave birth to her daughter, Esther. In Chicago, she found work in a microphone factory and later owned a dry cleaning and alteration business, eventually selling the business, divorcing her husband, and moving with her daughter to Skokie. She remarried in 1976. A few years later, she made a visit to the newly opened Holocaust Museum in Skokie, where she became a volunteer and speaker, contributing countless hours, sharing the story of her survival with thousands of students and visitors to the museum. She currently serves on the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center's Board of Directors and lives in Winnetka, Illinois. In 2019, her memoir, Unveiled Memories, was published. When Ida was born in May of 1939, the second of twins, her arrival was unexpected.
They didn't even know there were twins. They thought one child.
We spoke over Zoom. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, your father volunteered for the Polish army?
Yes. He believed in Poland. He was a Bundist, that was the organization who thought that they're going to integrate Jews and have the same rights as Polish people. So that's why he volunteered. And my mother was left with 3 children. I don't know how she made a living then. without husband support. I think the rest of the family was taking care of her, the sisters.
And where did your father end up when he went into the army?
That was very short, The German invaded Poland and won the war very quickly in a few weeks. And my father ended up somewhere by the Russian border. The Polish army ended up running away toward Russia. And at the border, the Russians were already aware what's happening, what the Germans were doing to the Jews. And they told the Jewish people, get away from Poland, come to Russia. And my father with other people, they went over the border because they invited them. And he ended up in Russia, and the Russian government sent those people in different locations because they needed working people. So my father ended up in Uzbekistan. And he worked there in coal mine and he was a tailor, so sometimes he was doing tailor work for the very important, generals and whatever. They wanted to have regular suits.
So you were taken to the ghetto. The Gestapo put people in groups and went to the mothers and took their children away. And your family, you, your mother, older sister, and twin brother, were put in a selection line to be taken away and killed.
Yes. And when they came to my mother, and she saw what's happening, she became aware of it, and she could not separate from her children. I understand that was like already 2 days that they were standing there and waiting, and everybody was, out of their minds what's happening, because they knew this is not normal behavior, this separation. And my mother started to run across, the place and into a building, and we followed her. What else could we do? And then she opened the door of this building, and I know she went to the left. I don't know why I remember that. Now I know she was looking for a window, and finally she went like a few flights up, and as we stood, I saw my mother going on the window and disappearing. And that came to me later, this memory that I did see my mother laying out dead body. I remember that. And then I remember that my aunt, my mother's sister, she took us into hiding. I don't remember how it looks, the hiding. The only thing I know that because of my other aunt who survived, told me that we were in a hiding in a building in the ghetto. And she told me, my aunt, that I was crying, and she put her hand on my mouth and she almost choked me. And since then, I didn't like my aunt.
She was doing that in order to keep you quiet.
Why? Because there were many people, So that's what I know.
The chaos that your mother's suicide caused,
yes,
really allowed you to make that safe passage with your aunt. And your mother's death actually ended up saving your life.
Yeah, I do remember chaos. People running in, directions, probably trying to run away from there.
And in that chaos, that's when your Aunt Rose swooped in.
Grabbed us. Yeah. I just remember walking with my aunt by the barbed wires, and this man calling her name Rose, Róża in Polish.
A man named Wilhelm.
Mai, like the month of May. I know that my aunt took me over the fence with barbed wires, and he grabbed me and he put on me his jacket and took me to the train station. And then I remember he knocked on the door of his wife, and she answered the door, and he told her, Josephine, Józefa in Polish, I brought you a Christmas gift. It was Christmas night. And this woman embraced me, accepted me. She cleaned me up. She, washed me. And, I was full of lice and whatever. And she told a friend, which I called my Christian godmother. And they took me to church and baptized me. And I became Irena Mai, my new name.
And Wilhelm had a condition for taking you, which was that you would remain with him
Yes.
forever, that they would raise you as their
Yes,
daughter.
their child.
Yeah. And you mentioned being baptized and renamed because at the moment that they took possession of you, your birth identity was something that you obviously needed to conceal.
Yeah, I didn't know my name is Ida. And the trouble also was that I spoke Yiddish, not Polish. At home, we spoke Yiddish, and my mother had to hide me so I wouldn't come out and play with children until I learned Polish, and I learned how to pray in Polish.
So not only did you have to learn certain Polish prayers to pass as their Christian daughter, but you had to learn Polish.
Yes, at age almost 4, 3.5.
Which luckily is the best age to learn a language, but
yeah.
And you've described your new parents as being very loving.
Yes, spoiling me. I remember even getting a bicycle.
So to earn a living, your father, your new father, took a horse and wagon and went around villages
He
in
sold
the town.
tobacco. Yes, sold tobacco, cigarettes, and vodka.
Okay. And what happened to him?
Well, the business kind of was good. So he invited his 2 cousins to join him. And when they came to a village called Odus, the Gestapo was waiting for them, and they shot all 3 of them. And I understand the people that they were there, they betrayed them for probably some sugar or whatever they got from the Gestapo. And my mother told me that some people told her that as he was running, he was calling my name. He said, "What's going to happen to Irena?" They thought it's his wife, Irena, but he worried about me.
So as you say, someone had betrayed them to the Gestapo, and they had ammunition for the underground and the partisans?
Yes, there was ammunition.
So was Wilhelm an active part of the underground, or was he just caught up in...
No, he was active. He was a very brave man. If you see his picture, you could tell that he was a very brave man and very patriotic.
Well, between that work that he was doing and then, as you described him calling your name at the time of his death and the way he had rescued you,
Yeah.
He sounds like a great and heroic man.
Yeah.
So you were once again left with a struggling mother, and she was a pregnant widow.
Yes.
So these were hard times.
Terrible. You cannot imagine how terrible it was. Always cold and always hungry and no place to sleep.
And at this time, your mother and you were rolling cigarettes and putting vodka into cleaned up bottles you'd find on the streets.
And sometimes the vodka was half vodka, half water. My mother was very inventive, She put wax and then a penny, and it looked like it's real, original bottle.
And there was also a shortage of food and clothing at the time, and Poland is not a country known for its warm weather.
Right. It was terrible. I still have arthritis, fingers that are crooked because they were frozen, and no shoes. So my mother cut either the hole in the shoe, and she used to put paper, to keep warm. And they were wet anyway.
Despite you having been successfully integrated into this family, passing as a blonde Polish Christian girl, there still was a threat hanging over your mother that she had this Jewish child.
Oh, definitely. If somebody will say something, she would be dead. The whole family maybe would be dead.
Because somebody might have been able to recognize you from...
No, they wouldn't recognize me. I absolutely didn't look Jewish. I look Polish.
I meant recognize you from the previous town that you had been in.
No, they wouldn't.
So I know that at the time you were basically picking potato peels out of the garbage and surviving on that.
Yes, yeah.
And when you were on the trains, you were sometimes separated.
Yes, that was horrible,
And why did that happen?
Because the train was so full of people. When my mother got out, I didn't have time because somebody stood in front of me and wouldn't let me out the train. The wagon was horrible.
And were you ever apprehended?
Yes, the train conductor took me home. And somehow my mother managed that somebody will call the station, whatever, in the other town. And eventually they brought me back to her. They were some good people. They were not German, they were Polish.
And at this time, not only were you passing as a Christian, but you weren't personally aware that you were Jewish.
No, no. I hated Jews.
Yeah. And you were aware of this sort of anti-Jewish feeling that was all around.
Oh, yeah, I participated. I was told that the Jews killed Jesus and they terrible people, they like devils and they kill Polish children and catch them and, use their blood, kill them, use their blood for their holidays. I heard it all the time, not from my mother. It was talked, people didn't have anything to do but set in groups and talk about ghosts, talk about Jews constantly, how terrible those Jews are, blame everything on Jews. If you didn't dress up nicely, you have the taste like a Jew.
And why do you think Wilhelm and Josephine were not anti-Semitic in that way?
I think they were real Christians that believed that you have to love your neighbor like you love yourself. They were a real Christian, not just for show.
So prior to your Polish father's death, your mother, Josephine, had been pregnant.
Yeah.
And when she had her baby, you moved in with your in-laws, and your grandpa had taken the death of his son quite hard, and it drove him to drink.
Crazy. Vicious. Not only me, everybody. He kicked his wife, he beat us, he ran around, we had to run out. He was so vicious, that's why we went away too from the house, just to be away from him. So the baby was left with the grandparents and we would travel. We were, looking for bread. There was not enough for everybody. We did it even after the war. What else could we do?
Yeah. And when you were away from the house, you really had to be careful not to attract the attention of the Gestapo, because even though you were passing as a Christian Pole, you were still subject to their whims.
Anybody, whoever didn't look, at them straight or whatever, they could do anything. They were powerful. That they're gonna catch my mother and take her on a truck and take her away for work or whatever. They did it on the street. They catch people for work.
And when they did find people without papers and such, they would drag them off the train and shoot them on the spot.
Yes, it was horrible.
And is that something that you witnessed?
Yeah, I witnessed something even worse. I witnessed a massacre that came back to me 30 years later. Yeah, I put it away. And then when I met my brother and we were walking by the fire station, it came back to me that I was standing there in the front of a house inside and waiting for my mother, and suddenly I saw everything. I saw the whole scenery.
Are a lot of your memories quite vivid?
Yes, I wish it wasn't.
Right. You write in your book that life in those days was full of dark secrets, dark skies, and dark apartments.
Yeah, and running to the basement.
Of your grandpa's house?
Yeah, because there were sirens and you had to cover the windows. I think they were afraid of Russians coming.
So the sirens were being sounded for the bombings?
Yeah.
And how often was that happening?
I don't remember, but quite often, I guess.
When you mention the dark secrets in that passage, what are you referring to?
People were whispering it around me, They were whispering, and I asked something. No. Children don't have to know it, Like I say, where is the neighbor? He was here today. Where did he go? He didn't come back. They said, oh, you don't have to know it, He went to whatever. Now I know why he wasn't there. So because it was a passage to another side of another street. After a while, they nailed it down because they took the part and made the ghetto. So I couldn't go, through this passage anymore. And I remember once, before they locked it, that there were people sitting sad, and now I know they were the Jews. So it comes back sometimes to me.
Yeah. So you hadn't really had a sense of the course of the war in terms of who was prevailing. But toward the end of the war, you did discover that the Germans were losing and the Russians were coming.
I heard about the Russians.
And one day, the Germans just left, taking with them whatever they, had absconded with.
It was very quiet. Like the city stood in place until another day or 2 days later, we hear this noise, music. And this comes tanks with Russian, with accordions, playing music. And we were so happy. People were happy. I didn't know why they happy because of them, but they told me they are liberators. Now everything will be different. And there was so much happiness, and they were drinking with them, and I don't know, we were very happy. Everybody was happy. But after a while, they left. They went toward Germany.
So after the war, a Jewish delegation came to visit, and your mother told them that she had sheltered you and was able to use that as sort of leverage to get an apartment.
Yeah. They organized themselves, like a charitable organization to help each other because they were homeless. So some of them lived in Częstochowa. There were a lot of Jewish people, and they came and they say, I want my apartment.
But the people who were involved in that effort wanted to make an exchange with you, which was that you would have to learn about your roots.
Yeah, they wanted to send me to Palestine, actually. They didn't mean to give it back to my mother. They wanted to take me to the train station and send me to Israel. Not Israel, Palestine at that time.
And they took you to a Jewish synagogue.
That was scary.
Yeah, for you having the anti-Jewish sentiment that you had and having heard everything that you had heard, this was the last place you wanted to be.
Yeah. I thought that they're going to murder me and use my blood for matzah.
Yeah, because you believed what you had been told.
Yeah.
And while you were there, you were basically trying to escape.
Yeah, but I couldn't. Everybody had an eye on me.
Yeah, and then getting back out on the street, that's when you did actually scream for help.
Yeah, I almost started a pogrom. The whole Poland heard about me. That's how my aunts discovered me, because of that incident.
So the police showed up, and you actually ran to your grandfather's.
Yes, I didn't go to my mother. Why did she give me, to a place like that? And now Grandpa knows I'm Jewish. And what does he say? Well, now I'm going to wait till somebody comes for Irena. The Jews have money. I'm sewing a big pocket for that money. And started to be a little nicer to me.
So 3 of your aunts had survived. And as you said, they heard the rumor that a girl, you, had almost caused a pogrom. And basically said, wouldn't it be something if this was Ida?
Yeah.
And they went about to find out if it was you. How did they do that?
They took a train and went to Częstochowa. And they knew that could be Ida because my aunt, before she died, she let everybody know that one of the twins, the girl, was given a man in Częstochowa. That was it. So they went to Częstochowa, to look. And they went to the Jewish community and they told them, don't go to Grandpa. But, they arranged that they will look at me, from across the street. And the minute they saw me, they knew it's me because I look like my sister.
So they obviously couldn't just apprehend you.
No.
They went home and they started to decide what to do about this.
Yeah. And in the meantime, my father shows up. He came back from Russia because, anybody who had Polish citizenship could come back.
And he got in touch with your aunts?
Yeah, because it was the same town where we all lived.
So he then went to the town and
Well,
made arrangements to go to your grandfather's house.
before that, my father wasn't that anxious to go to find me. I have to tell you, he did not. He waited and waited. Finally, my aunts told me, Leon, if you don't take her, we take her.
And why was he not anxious?
He didn't want to have children.
Did he not want the financial burden or?
No, he liked to be a bachelor.
Okay. But he was eventually cajoled into making the trip.
Yeah, because he believed, what will people say if they find out that he doesn't want me? It was so important in those days. Jewish people counted on what people will say, not what I'm going to feel, just what people will say. That was important.
But for you, this was a complete stranger and you didn't recognize him.
And a Jew.
Right. So what happened?
Well, eventually he had to go to the Jewish organization, tell them. And when Grandpa and my father met, and my father showed me a picture, and I recognized my mother. I still recognize, So my father knew him, his daughter. And he told Grandpa he wants me back. And Grandpa, well, the Jews are rich. He wanted, certain amount of money. Because across the street, there was another Jewish child hidden. And when the parents pick her up, they gave her a lot of money. So he heard about it. So he wanted the money too. So my father had to collect money from all over. And I think he sold my grandfather's house or something and finally gave him a few hundred dollars, not what he demanded. And the money went very fast toward the vodka.
And while one might assume that this was a happy reunion, it wasn't a happy reunion at all.
I spit at him. You know what I told him? Too bad Hitler didn't finish up all the Jews. My poor father, he had to hear it from his daughter. He cried. I screamed. I wanted to jump out the window, and he took me to my aunts. I was so petrified. That was horrible. I'm telling you.
I mean, you were depressed and scared.
Abandoned by God. I was in shock. I was complete shock.
And what did your father plan to do with you?
Oh, he didn't have a place to take me, so he put me in an orphanage, like in a Jewish orphanage, where I had food.
And in the orphanage, you were basically part of a group of lost little souls.
Like me. We all planned to run away and go back to our Polish parents. Because some of the children were given away from the Polish parents. They couldn't, keep them anymore. So they sent them. But they tried to tell us, about some holidays, Jewish holidays. I didn't understand it. It was like a fairy tale because they prepared the children for Israel. But not for long I was there because my father came back after he got married, 1, 2, 3, with another woman from Auschwitz. What was horrible. She didn't want me either, She lost her children and she was jealous that I was alive, not her children. She was very miserable. She hid food from me. She was very, very terrible. I felt like Cinderella.
And during that time, I assume that you were, longing for your Polish mother and your little sister and grandmother.
Yeah, I wanted to see them, yeah.
And were you able to start seeing them again?
Later, the grandpa discovered me. You know how he discovered me? Because my father took a picture of me when he took me out from grandpa. And there was a nice picture and the photographer put it in the window. And when grandpa was walking, through Sosnowiec, hoping that he will meet us, he saw the picture. So he asked the photographer, do you know where the people are of this child? And he said, oh, all the Jews are in Wrocław. So he went to Wrocław and he was smart. He went to the Jewish school to look for me. And that's where I was. And when I saw him, my goodness, the devil is here, So I went to the teachers and explained to them, and they said, he's not going to go with you. They ordered 2 taxis, one for me with the teacher and one for him to take to my father's home. And he started to beg my father forgiveness and whatever, that my sister crying for me, in, my mother, and, he's not going to drink anymore. Yeah. That I come and, so eventually my stepmother took me for a holiday there, and the first thing I did out of the train station, I said, you go to grandma and grandpa, and I'm going to my mother, my sister. And since then, we saw each other on vacations.
And the loving warmth of your mother was a stark contrast to what you were getting from your biological father and his wife.
Well, it took me a long time to believe he's my father, and he sent me to a Jewish school. And on the way, I went to the church, to pray. And eventually over there were some nice kids. They were Zionists. And they told me about Israel, about, what happened. I heard stories. And I started to open up my eyes, because I got older and I understood that I am Jewish and wanted to go to Israel. After the war, the government allowed to have Hebrew school and a Jewish school, just to show the world how open-minded they are. But then they closed the Hebrew school and all the kids joined the Jewish school. And I became very friendly with this girl that was in Hebrew school until today. And she kind of told me all about it, and about, the Jewish religion. Not that I understood it much. Until today, I'm not religious. I'm just, conservative, believe in holidays and tradition. So that's what happened.
I do want to talk a little more about the family dynamic. You have a quote in the book where you say, "Often I question my reality in the hands of a hateful stepmother and a weak father who did not protect me." What were some of the ways that he was failing to protect you?
If she said something wrong about me, he was quiet. There were neighbors who came and stood for me, and he did nothing.
So eventually, you and your dad and his wife were able to migrate to Israel. And arriving there, you talk in your book about forming an instant bond with the nation and people of Israel.
Yes.
You say, "I began to feel a love and a bond with the Jewish land.
Yes.
Exhilarated and with great pride, tears of joy
Yes.
flowed when I realized that this was my homeland.
Yeah.
I had come home."
Yes. Even right on the boat, when I look around, it's so bright, sunshine, people smiling, nobody walking around like in Poland, looking for food or, a line to buy something. People are stopping me on the street. "Oh, you cute blonde child," they were so impressed. And they all thought, "Are you from Russia?" Because there were a lot of people. "No, I'm from Poland." They say, "From now on, you learn Hebrew. Don't speak Yiddish." I never wanted to speak Yiddish, but when I came to Israel, that was the only language I could, communicate. But then I went to a kibbutz and I learned Hebrew.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast with Israel and where it's located in the world and the kind of climate that it has to a very gray and often cold Poland must have been, very eye-opening for
and
you.
The people are so nice. I wrote you when I came to kibbutz and they put me to work, and I right away have a headache and bloody nose. And they told me, "Sit by the tree in the shade." I said, yeah, I will. After that, I'll work. And the guy said, after work, "My child, go home, rest." And they never put me in the field work.
While you were in Israel, and you were about 18 years old by then, it became apparent to you quite quickly, I think, that, everyone seemed to be still looking for lost family from the war.
Everywhere. I go on the bus and they ask me, "Where are you from? What's your name?" Yes, all the time.
And you basically heard of reunions happening every day.
Yeah, one girl in a kibbutz found a mother. Because people say, "Oh, there is a one woman looks like you and you look like her." And, she was actually from my school and she found a mother. And then another lady that wasn't that good because she walked on the street and she found her real husband, first husband. She was already married to another one because, she didn't know her husband survived and went to Israel. So there were cases like that.
So you did find a job.
Yeah.
And you eventually stayed with your cousin who had a camera.
Yes.
And that led you to meet your future husband, a photographer.
Yeah. Well, he was divorced with a son, and we started to talk, and he asked me, if I would marry him. And I thought, oh, he has a son. I'm going to be such a good stepmother.
And you were still like in your late teens, and he was a bit older, right?
14 years older. And the son was with his sister-in-law. And the sister-in-law said, I'm not going to give up a 9-year-old child to an 18-year-old, So he stayed with my sister-in-law.
And you had your daughter, Esther, in 1959?
Yeah.
And that was while you were still in Israel?
Oh, yeah, 6 years.
But at the time, during those 6 years, what was your intent? Did you plan to stay there, or were you thinking to move to the United States?
I absolutely didn't want to move to United States. The problem was that my husband and his brother had a photo studio. And in those times, people started to buy cameras and do their own, pictures, the cameras that Polaroid. And our business went down, and it couldn't support 2 families. So eventually, one of his family went to the American embassy and signed up because he too was looking for work. And my husband said, why don't you bring us an application too? And a year later, the embassy calls us. And because of our situation, he decided I didn't want to go, but, so we came to the United States.
And you had an aunt in Chicago?
Yeah, because of my aunt was here.
And did you speak a word of English?
None. But I met good people that helped me.
So here you were, living in Chicago, learning English.
Working in a factory.
And you met a woman, Mrs. Davis.
Yes. Walking on Howard Street, and she took in my daughter. And she introduced me to some very nice people, the Serling family. And they had a daughter the age of my daughter. And they became good friends until today. They were the best neighbors.
And they basically were able to show you how to become American?
Yes. They took us to McDonald's.
So when did you move to Skokie?
I moved to Skokie in 1972 or 3. I had business. I opened a dry cleaning store with alteration in Chicago by Morse Avenue. It was such a Jewish neighborhood, and then it changed. Then I sold my business and went into computers, back to computers. That's when I sold the business and came to Skokie.
And is that when you had divorced?
Yes.
So you decided to move to Skokie as a single mother?
Yeah, with my daughter, yeah.
In 1992, you went to New York City for a conference of hidden children of the Holocaust. And that turned out to be a real watershed experience for you.
Yeah. Well, everybody brought some pictures, some documents. It was a chaos there, especially when the press found out about it. There were people with cameras and whatever. And I had this picture, of the miracle picture. And I put it on. Nobody recognized anybody, but some people were lucky they did. And suddenly I heard people speaking Polish. So I joined a group that spoke Polish. And they told us that now, after 50-something years, their Polish parents tell them, you are not my child, you are Jewish. And that's a big shock. And they say almost every week, every day, somebody comes with the same story and they don't know who they are. And when I heard that, I said, this is the place where I have to go and find my brother and my sister. I didn't know, that she's not here. So, I kind of took me time, and before I went, I got this Chicago Tribune. You saw that Chicago Tribune. There was this picture of this young man, and I also have a picture of my grandparents. And when I look at him and I look at my grandfather, I saw him in his face. And then he wrote something that he has no memory, but when he came from the orphanage, he had the people who took him from the orphanage, he had a little tag that said that he is Tomcho, and he looks like, my family, and then he has this Tomcho. And I said, I have to find out more about him. And the lady who interviewed him in Warsaw, I found her and I talked to her, and she said, Ida, he does not have any memory. I said, give me his phone number. And I called Poland, and one of his sons answered, and I told him, I want to speak to your father. He said, he's not here. I said, well, when your father comes, tell him to call me because I think he may be my twin brother. I was like shocked there. Well, and then, later I get a phone call and man's voice, answers. And he said, you left a message with my son. You think you are my twin sister. When were you born? So I said, May 3rd, 1939. He said, for sure, you're not my sister. I was born, some other date, whatever. Well, I say, how you know for sure you were born 19 whatever? He said, because my Christian birth certificate says so. So I said, so it's mine, He said, well, why don't you come to Poland? I'll, help you to look for your brother. Well, before he hung up, I said, do you have any memory? He said, no. So I said, why don't you send me a picture from your youngest age, because we have this picture where we sit on our mother lap. And a few weeks later, he does send me pictures. And when I look at the picture, his little son looks like me in the picture. And then he wrote, I told you I don't remember anything, but I remember I was always praying, God help mommy, God help daddy, and God help Mr. Leon. So I said, do you know who is Mr. Leon? He said, no. I said, you were always praying for our father. He's Leon. So we started to cry, and, we know that we are the lost twins. And then I went to Poland. And
before you talk about that, in this time that all of this was developing and you were basically putting these clues together and having these conversations, what was your state of mind during that time? Were you just very excited, nervous?
All of it. All of it. And very anxious to meet him, in person.
Yeah.
When we met, I start the sentence, he finishes the sentence. I like this, he does too. We order the same things. We go, so many things together that it's unbelievable. Yeah.
And I know that when you went to Poland, this was known to the press, to the local media.
Because he said so. He called the Polish television, and I called the Israeli television when I found out. And they all met us at the airport. And then the whole world found out about it.
Yeah. And you remember that moment of reunion vividly?
Oh, yes. He told me he's going to faint. So I had to take him to a chair.
And what about you?
Well, I was the strong one. Of course, we cried. Yeah, we cried.
Yeah. And you proceeded from there. I know you stayed for about a month.
Yeah. He told me, what? You came for 2 weeks after 53 years? So I stayed there, and they had another gathering of hidden children. And the Polish camera continued, and they made a documentary, which we didn't like because it was anti-Semitic.
And for his family, this was their discovery that
he is really Jewish.
Yeah. Some of them were not happy about that.
No, they said, don't tell anybody, that you are Jewish. One of his sons in school, they asked him, are you Jewish? He said, no, my father is Jewish. I'm not Jewish.
Yeah, and while you were there, and you're there, as you mentioned, for a month, the media is still following you around.
Yeah, we have the documentary. It took us to a concentration camp.
And during the war, that was an experience that you were spared of. But your brother actually had been at Majdanek. What happened to him there?
He doesn't know exactly what. He doesn't have much memory. But when I met him and he went to the doctor, she was Jewish. She took me away so he won't hear it. And she told me, your brother was, medically experimented. And then because he had marks, in his behavior. And he said that he had something in his leg, like a piece of steel. They removed it. And, they couldn't put a number on him because he was a child. He was too small. So they put it on the leg, the number. And the Polish step-parents, they were embarrassed that he was Jewish. They removed it.
And he, too, was liberated by the Russians. But they found him in a toilet at Majdanek.
Yeah, he was thrown into the toilet, yeah.
And they took him to the hospital, so they basically saved his life.
They were good to him. Yes.
As you said earlier, Ida, you brought your Polish mother to the U.S. a couple of times. And when she came and visited Skokie, it was quite an eye-opening experience for her,
Yes.
seeing the abundance of America in contrast to communist Poland.
Yeah.
And you found out in that visit that she had had her husband, your Polish father, return to the ghetto for your brother and sister.
When she found out that I have siblings, then she told him, go bring them. And there was nobody there anymore.
So when you were in Skokie, you went to the Holocaust Museum and they asked you to volunteer.
Yeah.
But at that time, from my understanding of what you wrote in your book, you didn't really think of yourself as a Holocaust survivor.
No.
It was they who identified you as one.
Yeah. Well, they said, first of all, they said children are not Holocaust survivors. They didn't remember, they didn't suffer. And finally, somebody told me, yeah, you did suffer. You told us you are a Holocaust survivor, And then I knew I am a Holocaust survivor. And then I met other Holocaust survivors. Then there were a gathering. We have an organization so huge now, a federation of hidden children and first generation, second generation, third generation. It's very big.
But you did start to speak publicly about your experience.
Only in the Holocaust Museum.
Okay. And what was that like? Because at that time in your life, were you reconstructing a lot of these memories?
Yeah, it was very hard to tell. My mouth got dry, words wouldn't come. And in sometimes I started to cry, and I learned to speak. Now I'm a good speaker.
But is it still hard?
Very hard. The nightmares don't go away.
And it was during the 80s that you and other survivors started to come out of hiding almost.
Yeah. Talking. I talked to thousands and thousands already to people. Yeah.
And in that, you say, you found a purpose.
Yeah, I miss it not being there. I miss it very much because I know that I leave a lot of impression, and I get letters from students and they say that I am, a hero to them, which I am not. My Polish mother is the hero. And they hope that I'll find my sister. The most lovely, lovely letters I get from the students. That makes my heart, so satisfied.
And in becoming a speaker at the museum, you're an educator. But during that time in the 80s, you started to educate yourself about what had happened.
And learn the history of the Jews. I learned I didn't know anything in Poland about Jews, the history of Jews, nothing. I learned here. I took books and learned from the beginning, history of the Jews.
So the last thing I want to touch on is something that I found to be pretty profound in your book, which is that you write that you learned to survive as a Catholic, a Jew, a communist child, a Zionist, and an American.
Right. I'm adaptable.
Yeah. And you said earlier that your Polish mother is your hero.
And my angel. Yeah, she's my real angel. And I tell you something, I don't know why, but I sometimes come across people that I think they are angels, that they help me in really very important situations. Not many, but I don't know why it happened to me. It's like somebody watches over me, because otherwise I would be dead. And that's why I am as I am, because she was the example to me. She was the hero. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid to speak up.
In late January 2022, Ida Paluch passed away at the age of 82. I'd like to send my heartfelt condolences to Ida and her family. You've been listening to Resistance, Resilience, and Hope, Holocaust Survivor Stories, a podcast co-production of Illinois Holocaust Museum and Chicago's Studio C. If you'd like to learn more about this episode and the series in general, please visit ilholocaustmuseum.org or studiocchicago.com/Holocaust. And please share this podcast, rate it, and subscribe. I'm Andy Miles, and I'd like to thank executive producers Marcy Larson and Amanda Friedemann for their assistance and guidance in bringing this podcast to fruition. Ida Paluch Kersz for her time and candor. And I'd like to thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast series, please consider a donation to Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. Illinois Holocaust Museum is a global leader, pioneering creative and technologically innovative ways to share survivor stories. Their mission is to share the history and lessons of the Holocaust, inspiring individuals to become upstanders and to speak out on issues important to them. Your generous donation will ensure that the museum's critical work continues for generations to come. To donate, please visit ilholocaustmuseum.org/donate or contact 847-967-4821.